Cool. So my name is Sina Fazelpour. I'm from Northeastern University. I'm jointly appointed in philosophy and computer science. And this is joint work with my colleague, Hannah Rubin, who's currently assistant professor at Notre Dame in philosophy. So kind of the basic tension that started this project was that there's lots of results, both simulation results, empirical results, and philosophical argumentations that argue for possible benefits of diversity of identities. And there are many different mechanisms that have been tested, that have been posited. Some of these have to do with cognitive mechanisms. So diverse teams have more ideas, more perspectives, more heuristics, more experiences. They question assumptions that sometimes go unquestioned. And some of these things have to do with the way that diverse teams share and process information from others. So they might not take information from in-group members for granted. They might feel less conformity. So there's all these reasons to think that diversity can result in better science, has epistemic benefits, can result in better knowledge. But when we look at meta-analysis of diversity results, we typically find that the impact of diversity when it comes to knowledge is much more mixed and contextual and varies from somewhat positive to even negative in many different cases. And obviously, there are many different reasons for this, many different social reasons, many different psychological reasons. But it has suggested to many people that instead of just thinking what are the possible ways or mechanisms that diversity could be beneficial, we should also kind of more closely look at when diversity is beneficial. So this is just kind of one broad way of framing this, but of course you can answer this question of when in terms of many different types of things, psychology or sociology. So from a cognitive scientific perspective, in many cases, when people ask this when question, they focus on the task characteristics. Is the task difficult, novel, is it complex? Or the personal characteristics of the individual with respect to the task. What are the differences in their task-related expertise, for instance? We wanted to focus on something that is more at the network level, namely homophily. So the tendency of individuals at a very broad level to associate it with similar others. So we wanted to see how homophily might moderate the impacts of diversity just at a understood at a very kind of broad proportionality of two different groups. And homophily is prevalent in science. You might have seen it in different ways that it manifests itself in citation networks or co-authorship networks. And there's some reason to think that it could actually be beneficial for groups. For instance, homophily has been shown in some work to slow down the spread of ideas. And slowing down the spread of ideas sometimes could be good because it allows the group to actually explore more regions of the problem space. It allows the group to avoid premature consensus in many tasks. So we have some reason to think that it might be good, but the studies often focus on one dimension of similarity between individuals in a group. So when we are saying individuals similar, obviously there can be many different dimensions, values, opinions, kind of more stable sociocultural identity markers. And they typically focus on one typical pathway of influence of this similarity, namely the way that it shapes the network of individual or the way that they assort themselves into different groups. So what we wanted to do was to look at this impact of potentially moderating impact of homophily by considering two senses of similarity, one more stable identity, the other one opinion about what is correct at a particular time, and I get to that, and three pathways of influence, because in the real world, unfortunately, we cannot pick and choose that, like, I want this pathway of influence to be active, but not this other one. Typically, when individuals assort themselves in a particular way, they might also have different types of tendencies towards those who they perceive to be similar. And we do this, we examine this in the context of an agent-based simulation. It's based simple kind of collective Bayesian multi-arm bandit, two-arm bandit. So how does this work? Is we have a group of individuals that might come from different identities. If there's an edge between two agents, it means that they're neighbors, so they can share evidence with each other. Each of these agents is engaged in a sequential learning task. So they see two options. It's two-arm bandit, if you're familiar. So you see two options. It might be a doctor that has to make a choice between two treatments, and they have to decide which one of them is better by repeating this and seeing the result. Each of these options, after it's tried, returns a reward to the agent, and the agent does not see the underlying process that generates this reward, but they have some subjective beliefs about which one is good, right? So they try the option that they want, informed by this subjective belief, and they update this belief. And so success on this task would be to eventually land on the correct option. Or if you want to be more stringent, to get the objective, get the correct belief about this. And we start with very kind of uninformative priors, very big priors that could be washed easily with the first experience. And the agents decide what they do in each of these cases as they have this experience in a kind of a greedy way. That is, they have a value for each of these options, and they just choose the option that they currently see as more valuable. That is, they don't do any exploration. They don't have this longer term vision about what is valuable. So the study one, we wanted to see the impact of homophily via its impact on network formation and its impact on trust relations between individuals. So in network formation, homophily's impact, we operationalize it as the ratio of the probability of individuals connecting to an in-group versus an out-group. And we choose those things. We go from ratio 1 to 8, and we choose the probability such that the overall average connectivity of the network remains the same, because we don't want to change that. We consider the impact of identity-driven homophily also on trust. And here, the idea is quite intuitive, that I get information from somebody. If they're from in-group, I treat it as if I got it myself. If they're out-group, I attenuate the weight of the information. So it impacts my prior beliefs less. But we also consider opinion-based homophily, in which case because agents' opinion change as they get more information, this trust factor also changes. So it's a dynamic trust factor that depends, in this case, on how often in the past have I agreed with one of my neighbors, right? If I see someone, how often have we had this case of agreement? And there are like easy ways of computing this. But this is basically a track record of past agreements with anyone, regardless of their group membership. So just the opinion. And we change the number of factors. I can go through this kind of quickly if needed. So we change the network structure, going from random, which is the ratio of 1, to ratio 8, which is a kind of very highly homophilic network. We change identity-driven trust, group size, group composition, and task difficulty. And we went with tasks that are quite difficult, in the sense that the objective payoff of the two options is quite close to each other. I can talk why we discussed this, but why we decided to go with this. And based on this, we want to see three things in this first study. One was the reliability of each of these collectives. That is, how often all the agents come to the correct consensus in, I think, 5,000 simulation runs. The other one was the speed of convergence. That is, when is on average, when is the last time that anybody changes their belief? So how, on average, when do they reach consensus? And then finally, the other one is efficiency. That is, at different time horizon, what is their success, right? So if they're very efficient, they quickly reach a successful result. So the first thing that you might expect is that homophily compared to complete networks in which everybody is connected to everybody else, homophilic networks and networks in which there's decreased trust, whether because of identity relationships or because of opinion-based relationships, they improve reliability. And the reason for that is that obviously their homophilic networks are sparser, and when trust is decreasing some of the neighbors, that also decreases the flow of information, and that prevents the group from going towards potentially misleading results. So prevents potentially misleading consensus or premature consensus. But obviously this comes at a cost to speed, because complete networks everybody shares information and the speed of convergence is faster. Compared to random networks, we did not find any significant change in reliability, at least when the network was large enough, though there was a difference when the network was smaller. But homophilic networks are faster. And this is something that was quite interesting because this goes against kind of a very, I think, well-established idea in the literature that homophilic networks compared to random networks are slower. Homophily slows down the spread of information. And I think this is this is a study by Golub and Jackson. I think one of the main differences is that in their study, the representation of the task that they use is based on averaging. So the learning task was updating by averaging your neighbor's belief. And when that's the conception of learning, it's very different compared to a task in which we have a kind of multi-element bandit and both groups have access to an independent world from which they can draw information. So a study two, we wanted to add a further dimension of similarities influence, which is conformity. That is, if I'm in a group and there are lots of in-group members in my group, then I might feel conformity pressure to act in a way that might not even go according to what I believe is the correct option. At a broad level, you can think about this as adding a further term here. So in the previous case, agents were just choosing based on this, but now we add this other term, which captures the social value of going with an option, as opposed to just the epistemic value. And the overall value of choosing a particular option for an agent is a kind of average, weighted average of these two things, where the weighting depends on how conformist they are in a particular case. More specifically for this conformity term, this is something that I had come up with Daniel still in a previous work. And it's based on this, what is called the other to total ratio, which is typically not for heterogeneous or diverse groups, for homogeneous groups, but it tries to capture two ideas. One, based on the diversity literature, one is that individuals primarily feel normative pressure to conform towards their in-groups. That is, out-group members have less pressure. And then the second one is that the mere presence of out-group members reduces conformity pressure. That is, it doesn't matter what opinion they have. So that's why they are not included in that numerator. So again, we look at it across different parameter settings. And this time, unlike the previous time, or in addition to the previous time, we were also interested for looking at cases of intergroup polarization because of conformity pressures, agents might kind of be pushed to different sides. And in addition to that, we were also interested in cases where people's or agents' beliefs comes apart from their actions. So they might choose a particular option, but because of conformity, that might be because of conformity. So the overall finding was that conformity, I think in line with previous studies, is overall detrimental to the reliability of collectives, but it does enhance the speed of learning. I should say overall detrimental when the task is difficult, not in all tasks, though actually it's tricky. This detrimental impact of homophily was exacerbated by conformity is exacerbated when the network is homophilic, when people are more likely to be in a cluster with their in-groups, which is reasonable, and when there's cases of identity-based trust, which agents give more weight to in-groups rather than out-groups, which again makes sense because you're already feeling the social pressure. Now you're only relying on the evidence from in-groups as well. But interestingly, the impact was curtailed by opinion-based trust. And one possible explanation is that when you put your trust in out-group members that think similar to you, you're giving them more epistemic weight. So you're more likely to receive evidence from them compared to in-groups that you're just forced to follow without really wanting to. And so that this kind of like switches the case from the one of the previous findings that we had in the study one. So the overall takeaways are that the effects of homophily on collective performance are complicated, depends on what the operative dimension of similarity is, what the operative pathway of influence is, what it is that we care about. Do we care about efficiency, speed, or reliability, and what type of task? So particularly between This study and the study by Golub and Jackson, I think it's important to keep in mind when saying that a particular kind of network structure is conducive or not for a particular task depends on the task characteristics. And in the paper, we also discussed the implications of this for proposals for promoting diversity in different cases. In this proposal, when we tie the value of diversity to that they can create better science, I think they will be very sensitive to this type of result. But it's important to decouple why we value diversity in the first place from always expecting it to somehow deliver some type of magic, particularly given that in real life, things are going to be complex. We are not going to see all of these benefits. And in our simulation, we are abstracting away from a lot of power asymmetries that one could even simulate, but we are not doing it. So yet another cause for caution about business cases for diversity, and lots of people have already said similar type of things about it. So yeah, thanks. I think hopefully I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. This is really cool work. I was wondering if, so one of your measures is speed of convergence to the correct answer or a consensus? Consensus. I was wondering if the way the model is set up, if there are cases where you might expect one of the two groups to converge first, and then the next one to sort of catch up, or if it's always sort of, you always have stragglers from both sides.
Right. So this is actually something that we are looking at right now. In the previous case, we did not have any meaningful difference because we kept the composition. So the groups were always a parity of representation between the two groups. So there was not any meaningful difference, and everything else was pretty much symmetric. But one of the things that we are doing right now is decomposing all of these metrics on members of different groups and looking at potential disparities between them when there's asymmetry in other cases. So asymmetry in the numbers, asymmetry in the trust relationship. So if we come from different positions, I might trust you a lot, but you might not trust me at all. Or similarly with conformity pressure, like if I'm from a minority group, I might feel obliged to conform at least publicly in some cases, but others might not care. So in those cases, what we are actually doing right now is decomposing all of these measures across different groups and then comparing them for potential disparities. And some work that somebody has done that was quite interesting was that in some of these cases that the group at a broad level does not reach the right result, consensus at a broad level, the individuals from minority groups might nonetheless get to the correct results. And they use that to argue for something like a standpoint theory results, which is cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay,